Well, I think too, maybe Ross is also scared just because of the fact that he found someone that he had coached that did what he said to go and do. Like, hey, look, I think turn two at Musport's flat. You know, we've all coached people and you always tell them, you can do this, no problem. And then I went and did it and Ross might have been like, oh, shoot, he's actually doing what I told him to do. I guess not to give up all my secrets. This, I don't think, is really a secret. But
come on.
No, all of your secrets. I want all of them now. I'm going to sell them online and make, enough for a sandwich.
And I remember in our cars, it seemed like the window net falling down and the pain in your back was very correlated. Like if the window net fell down on the landing, that was going to hurt your back. Or if your back hurt, there's the window net.
I was standing there in dad mode going, oh, man, I hope I don't end up down to one kid after this thing is over.
Okay, welcome to It's Not the Car. I'm Sam Smith. I have been known to commit acts of journalism, and I occasionally do something that resembles race driving, although I always feel embarrassed to admit it in this company. I once made my living as a very slow mechanic, but this is a podcast about racing. More specifically, it's a podcast about racing and people and the feeling you get when your brain is working so hard that it's just, up on plane like a boat just ripping along across the top of the waves. And conveniently, I am joined on this show by two people whose brains are far better boats than mine. Jeff, Ross, how are your boat brains?
I don't know anything about boats. But
Wait, really? Literally everything I mentioned here, whether it's airplanes or locomotives or the space program, you're like, yeah, I was in a space plane, train, airplane at some point. It was great. I had one in my backyard.
No, nothing about boats, unfortunately. I do drive and mechanic a motorhome. It's kind of like a big boat. It's a thing you put in the water, a boat, and pour money into. A motorhome's a thing you drive down the road and pour money into. So there's a similarity there. But I'm Jeff Braun. I'm a motorhome driver, and I get to talk to race car drivers on the radio on weekends.
And I'm Ross Bentley. I've been known to commit acts of driving and coaching, which are related. I've also been known to drive from the Red Bull Ring to Vienna with 12 Haribo gummy bears on the dash. And I'll leave it there.
Why 12? Why not 11? Why not 13?
That's top secret, Sam. And all I know for sure is that if you were in the car with me, there would have been none on the dash.
You've mentioned this story before.
What I know about you, Sam, is, man, Haribo.
I don't know, man.
Killer.
Some of us are grown-ups who behave like grown-ups, and some of us are grown-ups who behave like grown-ups but have deep-seated sugar addictions and probably look at candy the way a 5-year-old does. And we're not going to talk about that because I don't know anybody like that. But I know that story that you just mentioned, and I know where it's going, and that leads into today's episode. So today we have a guest, and the show doesn't feature a lot of guests, but we're closing in on the end of It's Not the Car's first year, and we wanted to bring on a few special folks to help us celebrate. So we're doing that over the next month or two. And today, I'll be honest, we couldn't find anybody special, so we got this guy who's both an utter disaster as a human and a racing driver, and that clearly makes his father a terrible person, whoever that guy is. Okay. So that's a bad joke. I have many bad jokes. This show is built on this. The real answer is that our guest is one of those people you call a racer's racer. He's widely regarded as one of the most versatile, most adaptable, and just flat out fast pro drivers in the business. And it's been that way for nearly 20 years since he started racing as a teenager. In June of 2006, when he was just 17, he became the youngest driver in American history to win a professional road race. He's driven in the American Le Mans Series, in World Challenge, in IMSA, in Grand Am, in Global Rallycross, in NASCAR's Feeder Series. He's won the 24 Hours of Daytona 3 times. His resume includes a Le Mans win. My voice is breaking up because I'm just so touched by it. 3 IMSA championships and a laundry list of fast laps and poles. And it was also just recently announced that he's heading into his 2nd season driving for Meyer Shank Racing in IMSA in an Acura GTP car. And finally, and this is my favorite piece of trivia here, he's Jeff's son, but we won't hold that against him. Colin Braun, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it. I've definitely enjoyed watching and listening to this show, and you guys have been doing a great job, and excited to finally, I guess, be asked to come on. It's awesome.
Okay, so Colin, we didn't bring you on to talk about just whatever, which we could easily do for like 3 hours, because you and your dad and Ross, if we weren't on air, I'd probably just start asking stupid questions, and then we'd have hours and hours of stories, and I'd be very happy. But as great as that would be, the reason you're here and the focus of the episode is something Ross and Jeff talk about a lot. And it's a quality common to all the great drivers throughout history. And I'm talking about adaptability. And I had to laugh this morning because when I was closing up my research and I pulled up your website earlier today, the featured quote on the site, on the front page of the thing, on colinbraun.com, is a quote from you that says, "As a little kid, I looked up to guys like Mario Andretti and AJ Foyt, who could drive anything and everything, who could be successful and win." And the funny thing about that line is everybody wants to do that. Everybody wants to be the journeyman who's quick in everything, but so very few people nail it. And also, like, so very few people want it from a young age. Everybody's like, "Oh, I want to end up in F1. I want to end up in stock car," whatever it is. When did you first realize you wanted to do this stuff for a living? And how long after did your dad look at you and go, "That's a terrible idea"? No.
That's a good question. I think, for me, obviously, as a real little guy starting out racing, I thought what you said, hey, I want to be in Formula One. That seems like the goal and the dream. And then I think as you progress along and start really kind of looking at the sport and how it works, you start to realize that's a pretty hard to achieve goal from even with a dad that's in racing, considering the kind of financial backing we had, was going to be a pretty hard to achieve goal. So quickly I pivoted to, hey, I love driving race cars or go-karts or anything that I can go and race and have a chance to win in. So I think it just quickly switched to, I want to make a career in racing and drive as much different cool things as I can. And I think when I was a little guy, I never would have dreamed about driving all the different kinds of things that I ended up driving. I mean, to do, sports cars and NASCAR and IndyCar and Rallycross and all these different disciplines, man, it's been such a fun journey, such a cool time. And I think, as I've driven each car, it's just helped me learn more, put more into my sort of, natural feel and things to draw on toolbox. And I think each thing's helped made me better in even the next thing I'm going to drive, or things that I've driven a bunch and I'm going to come back in and drive again. It just seems like it continues to help me grow and build.
Jeff, so you have two sons, and so, like, the interesting thing about Travis and Colin, your two boys, is that both of them went totally different paths, and both of them have been really successful in it. So Travis ended up in Hollywood, screenwriting and show creation, TV show creation. But at one point, they were both into racing pretty hardcore. What did that split look like? Like, how do you talk to your kids when they're trying to figure out what they want to do? And how do you not squash that while also encouraging it, while also not encouraging it too much?
A lot of people ask me that, and it was not hard. It was not, we got lucky. Both our kids found something that they were super passionate about at a very, very young age. Colin wanted to drive. Travis wasn't so sure about that. Although it was pretty good. We have this go-kart track at home, and Colin and Travis used to have some good races. And, Travis just found writing and creating and telling stories to be his thing. So we just encouraged that. It was pretty easy, really.
Jeff, one of the things that I observed is you kind of gave opportunities, but then just got out of the way. Like,
absolutely.
Hey, I have coached some young drivers, and parents maybe got in the way a little bit.
Yep. I would say
you didn't.
No, of course not. No, never.
I have to do one dad correction because it's important to me.
Please.
Colin just let it slide. But Colin has 4 Daytona 24-hour wins.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Not
God,
fair.
I missed the fourth.
I mean, he has 4 watches that say winner on the back. I'm pretty sure, right, bud?
God, Colin, you should have said something. I'm such an ass.
It says Le
Forgive
Mans
me.
winner. Hey, it's fine. I don't mind. As long as people are having me on their shows, I tend to be nice to guys that invite me on.
Yeah, and he has
my
one that says
God.
Le Mans winner too. So he has
all
5
good.
Rolexes.
It's all good.
So that's the dad brag. Sorry. Okay, now we can move on.
So
I
now
promise
that
not
I've
to brag anymore.
No, that's okay. Like I live for my own screw ups because in the end I'm like, oh good, I've made a mistake today. I can feel better about myself. Or worse, we can move on. It's happened. Okay, so now that that's happened, so like the list of stuff you've driven, man, and I want to get to the adaptability thing because the list of stuff you've driven is utterly bonkers. And we can't sit here and list literally everything, but I did build a small chunk of it. And if I missed something like a class of car, throw it out. Because I know there's a bunch of open wheel stuff that's hard to trace. But starting at karts, light duty open wheel stuff, and then the non-chronological list is top class prototypes like GTP cars, Daytona prototypes, DPIs, junior prototypes, LMP2 and LMP3s, stuff like Oricas and Legers, GT3 cars like 911 GT3Rs, RSRs, Cup cars, a Ford GT at one point, Robertson's, Ferrari F430s, and a stint in Global Rallycross. Plus, this year you were able to get into one of the Dale Coyne Indy cars, which was just the raddest thing in the world to see, and it was super cool because every time before we would tape, Jeff and Ross would talk about it, and I'd sit here and just ask dumb questions. But when you started out, the first time you got into something that you didn't know how it worked, right? Leaping out of karts into cars. What was the first car you ran after karts?
I think the first car would have been a Formula Renault little 1600, which was kind of like a Formula Ford, basically, with little wings on it. And that's what Ross had at his school that I went to up there in Washington.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it was definitely a different, thing to get used to coming out of a go-kart. But, I think I talked to Ross obviously a lot at that time about transferring kind of the skill that I had in go-karts and what that was going to look like going into a big car. And I think, it's in a way, it's all of these cars are kind of the same. They're, 4 tires and a steering wheel, and people talk about that all the time. But I think when you really start to like get into it and drive them and feel it, to me, it becomes even more clear that that's really how it works. Like everything in between you and the tire is just, something to kind of have a little bit of a feel for, trust, or a little bit of confidence to work through. But once you kind of find driving the limit of the tire, like all these things end up being not so different.
Colin, can you talk about when you went into NASCAR and you did some ARCA races and then you got into running the Craftsman truck? I don't know if it's called the Craftsman Truck Series anymore. I don't know what it is anymore. Camping World, I think, isn't it? Anyways,
it is.
The NASCAR Truck Series. And I can remember during that season at one point when you said something along the lines of, okay, now I own this thing. And up until then, you hadn't owned it yet. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think for me, it was kind of the same thing in my karting career. Like for me, every car that I drive that is new or I haven't driven a lot, I feel like you're driving behind it or you're riding along. You're not like hustling the car. And I feel like when it clicks and you start to really figure out how to drive the tire and slide the tire, and you feel confident that you can, drive over the limit of the tire just a little bit where it's not going to spin out or crash or, really bad things happen. You're just going to be just a bit over the limit. That's when you sort of own it or really start to drive it, because then you're able to hustle the thing right up to where the tire starts to go, oh, that's a little too much, and slides, and you go slower, and that's the limit of the car. And so I think that's sort of that, whatever, the limit or the confidence to drive the thing and, own the car in a way.
So be able to drive a little bit beyond, but then dial it back, but not like you're constantly.
Yeah, be able to drive like, aggressively over the limit, know that you're going to be able to catch it and bring it back. Not always sitting there like wondering like, ooh, man, if this slides, am I going to just spin out and crash in a blaze of glory? Or is this like, am I way under the limit? Or am I like, man, an extra half a mile an hour and I'm going to go off? Like, you don't know where that is until you can have the confidence that, I think by the time I got to that, I don't know, mid first year of racing the NASCAR stuff on the big tracks, I started to have the confidence I could drive into a corner 5 miles an hour too quick, and I was still going to be able to catch it on these big 1.5 mile, oval tracks. Where when you first start out, you're, driving around these big 1.5 miles at 180, 190 miles an hour, and you're like, wow, am I on the limit, or am I not even close? Or I just don't know what it's going to happen, or what the feel is. And there's so many variables when you get to the NASCAR side of things, with tire deg and the way the tracks rubber in and the lines and all these things, that once you start to have that confidence, hey, I can carry too much speed in here and I'm not going to crash, like that's when you start to own it.
So I have a question on that. So the NASCAR thing is like that, like finding where the edge is. To me, being in a GTP car at, I don't know, we were just at Road Atlanta, turn 1 at Road Atlanta with high downforce. Finding that limit to me would seem to be very hard, because you don't really slide a high downforce GTP car at the limit. And maybe you do in a NASCAR car on 1.5 miles. I don't know. Explain the difference in that feel, because you've driven, 180 mile an hour NASCAR car on 1.5 miles with very little downforce comparatively to a GTP car at 180 miles an hour. It must be entirely different. How do you find that limit in one of those high downforce things?
Yeah, I think, I guess not to give up all my secrets. This, I don't think, is really a secret, but
come on.
No, all of your secrets. I want all of them now. I'm going to sell them online and make, enough for a sandwich.
That's why
I've been doing that for years. I've been giving away Colin's secrets for years.
Okay, so first job is drive Ross out of business, then sell them online. Cool. I have my retirements planned out.
Well,
I call this thing speed secrets, but it's really Colin's secrets.
Well, it's really not, though, because you're the one that taught me all these. So I'm just regurgitating back your things you told me that you're now stealing. It's a big circle. No, but, I think to me, to be really fast in any car, you've got to slide the tire. And I think if you really think about it fundamentally, you want to be over the limit or just at the limit of the tire in almost all phases of the corner, from the entry to the middle to the exit. I think, right, Ross?
Yes, maybe. Well, I kind of want to go. So, Colin, the difference between a NASCAR truck or Xfinity car or whatever it is that amount of slip is maybe a little bit more, whereas in a GTP car, it's just a little bit narrower window. And I think if anybody really wants, you really need to go and do a YouTube search for Colin's qualifying lap at Mosport in a GTP car, because it is the most mind-boggling thing to see and also terrifying thing to see.
Okay, hold on. Okay, when Ross Bentley says that he's watching a video and it's mind-boggling and terrifying, I have so many questions. But more important, just the first one is what makes somebody like you, Ross, with all of your background, with everything you've seen, everything you've helped make happen, and all the drivers you've coached, what makes somebody like you pause when you see something like that? Because that's the core of the adaptability here that we're talking about here with Colin. And Colin, close your ears. I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass, but like the core of this is that ability to find that immediately, quickly, in just about anything. And if somebody like you is pausing and going, wait, when you watch it, what is it about that footage, about his actions? What do you see there that gives you pause?
First off, it's Colin, and I happen to care about him.
Right. Sure, he's disposable. It's fine. He's a Brown. We've got lots of Browns.
But I think it gets to the point that Jeff's talking about is, in a Cup car, you see the car sliding. When you see most GTP cars going through a corner, it's hard to see that. But that lap particular, and pretty much every other lap that Colin's ever turned at Mosport, which is a place that not just a car you own, but that's a track you own, is the car was sliding. And to see a GTP car come down the hill in turn 2 and slide to the point where you're using a lot of track on the exit of turn 2 at Mosport at, I don't know, how fast is that? 160?
150, yeah. 150, 160. Somewhere. Yeah.
And the car is moving around a lot. And then there's somebody behind the wheel that's going, I got it, I got it, I got it. And I'd like to go and kind of go, Colin, did you feel that way? Or did you go, ooh, I don't know if I got this?
Well, I think too, maybe Ross is also scared just because of the fact that he found someone that he had coached that did what he said to go and do. Like, hey, look, I think turn two at Mosport's flat. We've all coached people and you always, tell them, this, you can do this, no problem. And then I went and did it. And Ross might've been like, oh, shoot, he's actually doing what I told him to do. Maybe that's too much. So maybe that's where he was a bit concerned. I don't know.
Yeah, but did you know you had it?
I did. Yeah, no, I did. And I think, where I was going with it a little bit ago was just once you start to figure out that you need to slide the tire a lot to be on the limit and to be fast, whether it's a NASCAR car or it's at Mosport. Like I know turn two at Mosport, I'm going to need to slide the tire and to feel the tire and to be just over the limit of the tire. And whether it's got a lot of downforce or no downforce really doesn't change the fact that I'm going to need to slide the tire. If I have downforce to use, I can just go faster because the car will take more before the tire slides. But I still have to slide the tire to be on the limit.
Okay, so the process to find that in whatever car you're in, right? 20 years ago, I'm assuming that process changed, but did it get quicker? When you meet a new tire, meet a new setup, meet a new car, whatever it is, the start to finish of, oh, this is interesting, I have a lot of questions, and then all of a sudden, I got this, the thing is working, I can do anything with it or anything I need to. Did that process get quicker over the years? Did it condense or did it just kind of refine? What's it look like as you've gotten deeper in your career?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely refined and condensed and is shorter. And the more different cars that I drive, the more I can drive a new car and just be like, oh, it's sort of a cross of that car and this car together. And that's what the feel is. And that's one of the things I love doing now is driving a new car I've never driven and going out and seeing how quickly I can be fast in it. Because you drive enough different things and at some point, I don't want to say it all runs together, but at some point it doesn't become as exciting as it once did. And so now my goal, I set my own little mini goals and I go out and try to drive this new car super fast in the first 2 laps. That's all I'm going to give myself, just to see how quickly you can get going and figure it out and be on the limit. And that's really fun.
Speaking of that, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? You did that vintage event and drove a 1990s Mark III prototype, best car in the world at the time, fastest sports car in the world at the time, and on the same weekend drove a continuation GT40 from the 60s. And I remember you texting me and I'm like, how's it going? And your thing was you wanted to be as fast as you could on lap 2 in those 2 very different cars. And so, that must have been weird to try to go out and hustle a GT40, do your best Dan Gurney imitation on lap 2 at Sears Point. And that tire had treads in it, right?
Yeah, I was going to say 2 things for me on the GT40 is one, I don't think I've ever driven a race car that I can remember with treads. And 2, I've never seen anybody before I go out with the hammer, knocking the thing tight, the wheel lock tight. I thought they were joking around when they did that. But they were out there with the rubber mallet. He's like, I'm just I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm just making sure the wheels are tight. And I'm like, this is very authentic. But yeah, no, it was fun. And then I think the worst part was Bill Riley jumps in and he says, look, this car's super expensive and really valuable. We're trying to sell them. So if you crash this thing, it's not going to be good. So I gave myself a bit more leeway on that one. Again, looking at the fact the wheels were knocked on with a mallet and this guy just said, if I crash it, it's going to be bad. I went a bit easier. But the other one, the Mark III, I was flat out in. That was a blast.
So, Colin, I want to ask you about the Mark III, the Riley and Scott, because, hey, that's what I raced, and I raced against that car a lot. And I'm curious what your thoughts were. For me, it's weird to be going, well, it's not weird, but it's depressing when I look and go, oh, cars I race, they're at vintage races now. And there's Colin driving one of them. So what was that car like for you?
It was such a fun car. It's it was really interesting for me to drive that 67 Ford and then jump in that 90s era GTP car. And then obviously I'm current in LMP2 and GTP kind of cars. And you look at, the 30 or whatever years between all of those cars. And man, they've done a lot of work from the 60s to the 90s. From the 90s to the 2020 range, it's way closer. I mean, it's crazy. I think if you were to blindfold yourself and drive those cars and not know the timetables of them, you'd swear it's like, hundreds of years apart between the Ford and the Mark III, where the Mark III and current today stuff, it's really not so different. I mean, to me, the Mark III felt very similar to an LMP3 car with, maybe a bit more power. But I mean, the fundamental of the downforce in the car and how it drove and the feedback in the wheel, like, man, I loved it. I had a lot of fun in it.
You remembered how to shift, a pattern shift?
I did, barely. I remembered my Team 16 days when you taught us how to shift an H pattern car for sure.
Wait, Ross, so you had to teach all of the 16 kids you had to teach them to drive a clutch pedal?
Oh, they had only ever used a clutch pedal to get the car moving out of pit lane. They had never done an H pattern shift. And I said, you guys, you're going to have to heel and toe. And they're like, heel and what? And they're like, well, you brake with your right foot. We've never braked with our right foot before.
Ever.
Yeah.
Ever.
Never.
I remember riding around in the car because we started with a little 2-seater Porsche race car, and Ross was driving, and we all jumped in to do like a ride around lap around Sonoma because we'd all never been to Sonoma either. And I remember that I spent all of my time looking at Ross's feet moving and never literally out the windshield just because I was like, how is all this heel and toe shifting going to work? Like, and then I watched his feet and all that happening, and I got out and I'm like, I'm not sure I can do all this. Like the driving the car part and the braking and all that's fine. But this looks like magic happening down here. And yeah, it was hard. And it was hard to get your head around.
It took you all of 2 laps to figure it out.
It's so funny. All the kids, all the younger kids I've seen or worked with that have to get back into something on a racetrack that has a clutch pedal and a manual box and they grew up in sims, they grew up in paddles. Their knee-jerk reaction is always something like, why do I have to do this? This is so unnecessary. But so that raises a question, right? Because the process of learning anything is the process of answering questions in your head and getting answers and then acting on those answers, right? So by extension, the first time you get into a new car or use a new gearbox or whatever it is, meet a new track, you spend a lot of time, and that time may vary, right? Some people it might be 30 seconds, some people it might be 3 weeks. You spend a lot of time asking questions and looking for answers. So on that note, your first lap in a new car at a track, let's simplify it. Just keep it to the car. And let's say you know the tire, but you don't know the car, and you've driven something similar. Your first lap in that, what are you asking yourself? What are you looking at? What kind of answers do you need on that? You're not yet in it, but you're looking for it. What's it look like?
Well, I think it starts with days prior calling Ross and going, hey, how do I do this? What's going on? Give me the secrets.
Sure. But so what's that? How does that process work in your head? It's a new thing and you're learning it. What do you tell yourself?
Yeah, I think for me, it's, I know that I need to get connected to the tire somehow and figure out what that, tire is going to feel like. And if I've driven the kind of tire before and, I use a GT3 car as an example, because it's all either Pirellis or Michelin's most of the time. And so if you know the tire and it's a new kind of GT3 car, you kind of have a feel for where the brake points are going to be to get close and what that looks like. And then I think I've always been a big fan of feeling the tire and kind of that car connection very easily on the corner exits. It's easy to put on the throttle and feel like, oh, I can really slide the car a lot and catch it, or wow, this seems really nervous and edgy. And then that sort of sets the tone for that corner entry phase when you get there, how it does straight line braking. What that sort of feels like. And then pretty quickly, you're just kind of sliding the tire around on the exits pretty easily. And then it just comes down to finding that, sort of brake point, mid-corner speed point. And that takes a little bit more time, I think. But, that's kind of the the quick version of that, I think. And then you get to the real detail mechanics of how to find real lap time and, give up a little in this corner to make this corner work or the line or whatnot. But as far as figuring the car out, I think it's just, again, goes back to kind of figuring out that connection between what I feel and feeling that tire slide. And, some cars have a lot of roll, some don't. Some pitch a lot on the brakes, some don't. But again, I'm just looking to try to get to what is the tire doing.
I don't want to give or don't want you giving away your Colin secrets, but like I know on sort of out laps, the first few laps as the tires are coming up to temperature, you're probably, turning the wheel a little bit and kind of going how much, how reactive is the front end? How much do you continue doing that as you learn that tire car connection as the tires come into full temp? Are you like at times just going, I'm just going to crank in a little wheel here and see what the car does?
Yeah, for sure. I do that all the time. I think that's one of the greatest little tricks that I think you probably taught me, Ross, back in the day is, you get to the middle of the corner and you feel like the car's understeering or it's not turning well enough. Just add a little bit more steering angle and see, does the car turn? Does it slide the tires? And then that gives you a really quick indication of, either over the limit or I'm under the limit. And if you're under the limit, you got to drive the thing harder. If you're over the limit, then you get to yell at your engineer and tell him, hey, I need some more front grip. And then that's easy.
I've got a quick dad story about this. We have the go-kart track at home. When Colin was racing karts, we would do homeschool, and then he would fire up the kart and go run. And we would, me and Diane would be inside. We'd be doing our thing. Travis would be doing his thing. And Colin would be out there just running laps in the go-kart. Shifter kart, even when he was too little to drive to race shifters, he'd be out there in the shifter. And he'd be going and going and going, and all of a sudden it would stop. And we'd hear the noise stop, and we'd go out there and look, and then he'd just be putting more gas in because he ran a whole tank of gas out. Then he would go around and around and around and around and more, and all of a sudden you'd hear boom, and we'd run out there, and the right rear tire would be blown out, and he would be pushing it back because he would run tires right down to the cords, and then he would keep going. He would look at the right rear tire, and you could see the fuzzy. It was starting to get fuzzy, and he would then try to work on, you can explain this, bud, but he would then try to not make that blow out by using the other tires harder and make that one last as long as possible. And so I think you can apply that whole tire management thing to karts. And I don't know, I'm assuming you started working on that way back then, right?
I did. And I think it's, it's funny to hear the story as a great tuning tool and a lesson, but it could have been just the fact that we were too cheap to buy me new tires. And so
there was that too.
That's what you had to run until they blew out.
Definitely.
No, but it was good. I mean, yeah, definitely learning how to use the tire. And, there's lots of times today where you have a car where the tire degs off or you can't quite get the balance, or the race is so long that the track changes, that you're always looking to try to do what you can to help the car drive better. And, there's so many small little things you can do, like, squaring up the corner just a little tiny bit more to help save the rear tire, or drive, straighter off the corner, or whatever. Tons of different things to kind of change how much tire you use. And I think those were a lot of the same lessons that I learned, back then on the go-kart track, for sure.
That reminds me, of then when you got into that Formula Renault car. I remember Jeff, us at Buttonwillow testing one time with Colin, and we're like, take the front wing off the car, Colin, go. Now take the rear wing off the car. Now disconnect the rear bar. I mean, all those things, essentially it was some form of child abuse, I think, wasn't it?
Well, you've mentioned that before, right? But what I found really interesting about it is the notion that both of you, when you set out to coach Colin and get him learning things, it was always from a standpoint of giving him a baseline to build from, right? It was always the teach a man to fish thing. And so, Colin, do you, how often, I mean, it happens to everybody, but how often do you find yourself sitting there and thinking on like trying to solve a problem in the car, whether it's what the car needs in terms of setup, what you need to do differently in terms of your technique, or what you say, looking for one of those answers that you maybe don't understand, even if that search is half a second long or 5 seconds long or half a lap or whatever, not very long. How often do you end up sitting there and realizing that as you're looking for answers, you're consciously thinking about it versus just kind of poking and playing and trying and experimenting? Like, do you end up stopping kind of the mental train of thought and going, wait, well, how am I going to figure this out? Or is it just, it doesn't happen? It's just a stream.
No, I think it's definitely there's times where you're, consciously thinking about like, what should I do here? What could this, could I change this or try that? But, I think obviously at some level we're all, even when we're learning something new or it's slightly different, we're still subconsciously driving. I mean, you have so much experience driving to just kind of rely on the subconscious bit to a certain degree. But, there's definitely times you're consciously thinking more than you would be if you knew it really, really well. I get in a new car or, a new track and you're driving on autopilot, but you're using your brain to sort of make those little adjustments here and there and thinking about, this line could change, or I should use this curb more, or, if I tracked out a bit more here, that would help open up this or whatever, a lot of those kind of small things that I think go on, and that's where I think having a good foundation subconsciously driving lets you think about a lot of those things that probably helps you learn even quicker because you're not having to just be overwhelmed. You can sort of put the driving piece aside. And then, I found myself oftentimes thinking about coaching myself. And even I feel like I sound like Ross in my head when I'm coaching myself.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. When I hear Ross coaching myself in my head, it's mostly just stop doing that. Stop doing that. Stop doing that.
So Colin, one of the podcasts that you and I did a bunch of years ago, I think you were on the show. You and Jeff were on my Speed Secrets podcast more than anybody else was. And I think we recorded like 2 or 3 of them while we were driving from the airport to the racetrack in Europe that year. And I remember a conversation we were having where we were talking about cornering lines. And you said, I never listened to my podcast, but I remember you saying something along the lines of, hey, I've driven open wheel Formula cars at Road Atlanta. I've driven NASCAR cars, tested them there. I've driven front wheel drive. I think you'd driven a Kia something in whatever World Challenge at the time or something. You'd driven prototype cars. You'd driven GT cars, the Porsches and stuff like that. And you said something along the lines of, the line doesn't change. And so in terms of the adapting part of it, how much of it is, I got to change my line because I'm driving a rear engine Porsche, or I'm driving a front wheel drive car, or I'm driving an open wheel car. And how much of it is just, this is what the car is telling me and what those tires are telling me?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a lot more of this is what the tires and car tells me to do subtly. I think, if you were to stand there and like look at the line in turn 1 of me driving all those cars, Ross could probably tell because he's unbelievable at standing in a corner and looking at the car speed and the lines. But I think a normal person would say like, that's the same line in all of those cars. I mean, it's these subtle little differences. And, it's funny. You spend enough time driving cars and having time to drive cars. And, there's times you're just logging laps, doing whatever things. And you end up just kind of horsing around going, I'm going to try to drive not the right line and see how much that slows me down. It's crazy how bad of a line you can have and how fast you can still go. And, it's funny watching these people get all wrapped around the axle on lines and turn-in points and picking references and all this stuff. And yeah, I mean, of course, there's all those details. But man, at the end of the day, like you could be pretty fast and be pretty ragged.
It reminds me of, you guys have always said, and Colin backs us up on this, the quote of drive the car, not the track. But what about how much does the data and the video help? So, for instance, you're co-driving with Tom Bloomquist, super fast, top pro. You guys are like right there. do you, but I'm assuming maybe that your laps come, maybe you're running the same exact lap time, but they come maybe a little differently. How much does looking at Tom's data or your own data or Tom's video and all of that analysis, you're talking about figuring it out mentally as you're going, but then now here's some real hardcore analysis where you have plenty of time to think of it. There's no subconscious going on. You're looking at Tom's data versus your data and all of that. How what's that process and how much does that help?
Yeah, I think, Tom's an interesting one because I think in my career, I've never driven along someone that has driven so similarly and like such a similar kind of car that a lot of times both Tom and I will be excited to sit down and go through the data and look at where he's better and I'm better. And then we end up looking at it going, oh man, like this is laying over the top of each other. The way we work the brake pedal, the way we trail the brake, like, holy cow, it's all like, I can't even tell who's who here. So he's sometimes a disappointing example because you're like ready to learn. And then there's nothing. It looks like a mere version of yourself. And you're like, well, damn. And he kind of says the same thing, like, well, and then we both go like, well, maybe that's just the limit of how fast this car can go today if we're both doing that. But no, I think it's interesting in ways. I've definitely driven with guys where they have a different style. Like they might really attack the entry and gain time there, but lose a bit corner exit. And, some corners it works, some it doesn't. But, I think when you get to a certain level like that, the small little tweaks and the small little things, you're starting to figure out yourself as a driver. Like I need to overdrive the entry here because the exit doesn't matter. Those little things you're starting to figure out. But it's always interesting to look at data from someone else and kind of go, wow, they're making lap time up that way, and then try to, see if it works for yourself. But I think I've had instances where it certainly has helped and worked, but I've also had instances where they're able to make it work and I'm just not able to make it work that way. And yeah, I think that's a tough one.
How do you deal with that when let's say you and Tom get there and you're looking and going, I don't know, there's just nothing left. How do you accept that, or do you not accept it? Like, do you ever get to the point where it's, well, I'm sorry, but I've got nothing left?
Well, you have always told me, Ross, that when you get to that point, you swing around and look at the engineer and tell the engineer, hey, this is what I need to go faster. So I think it's, I think it's, certainly you're always looking at yourself and how you can do better and what things you could drive differently. But really, I think it comes down to, at that level, working with the engineers to get what you need out of the car. And when we agree, when my co-driver and I, particularly Tom and I, agree on what we need out of the car to go better, it makes it that much easier where, if they can give us that, we'll extract the lap time and we'll make it work and go faster. But, between two pro guys driving, kind of their own way that is similar, and if it's not working and that's kind of the limit, then I feel like you quickly get to the point of, like, hey, we got to work on setup wise, this and that. And then you either make improvements or you don't. And, you get into the race and then you just got to adapt and try to figure it out. But I think that's kind of one of the fun things, particularly I would say in the GTP class right now, is there's so many open things we can work on, from not only springs, bars, setup, but all of the systems and control systems and powertrain stuff that we can work on, that you can have a huge impact on all those little things that help you drive better. So I think that's been pretty exciting.
Colin, I think I know the answer here to some extent, but how much of your success and your ability to connect with the car and the tires is because of your huge, deep understanding of the setup, the engineering? Jeff sent us, Sam and I, a video, I don't know, a few weeks ago, of you running a shock on a shock dyno when you're like 5 years old and explaining how a shock absorber works. And it's
from
like,
school, right?
How much of that, when you're in the car, you're going, I know what that shock is doing. I know what that spring is doing. I know what that bar is doing. And, the takeaway would be to somebody listening to this going, well, maybe I need to understand that more. Or can you get bogged down in it? I guess is where I'm also want to know what your
Yeah,
thoughts
I
are.
think it's a good one. I think it really helps me understand something early and quickly. If I'm going to drive a new car, I can kind of look at it and go, hey, I see how that suspension works. I see how this works. Okay, that's similar to what this car was that I drove, and kind of, I can kind of preload my head with what I think this car is going to feel like. And then I think, again, it goes back to that you're sort of consciously thinking about learning and driving the car those first laps. And then, when it comes time to really, really go fast, I think you have to turn all that off and just drive the thing, at the limit, over the limit, and just go flat out. But I think having that understanding really helps me adapt to a new car quicker than if I had no understanding and I just sat there and drove something,
You mentioned we're talking about adapting and the technical part of it that Ross just mentioned. And you briefly talked about the GTP car and all the tools that a modern GTP car has, that like an LMP2 that's nearly as quick, but it doesn't have all the, I mean, you've shown me this, the manual of the cockpit manual, and it's like, I don't know, it's like 80 pages long and very complicated. There's a lot of adapting there, and a lot of things that you can do with those knobs and switches in your brake-by-wire and your regen and all the electronic controls and stuff is, understanding that obviously must help. But how do you use that to adapt? You talk about you adapting, but you can now kind of adapt the car to the tire dag and the conditions, right?
Big time. Yeah, I think you're even more so needing to drive the car on autopilot subconsciously and use your brain power to think about all the different tools you have at your disposal to try to make the car do what you want it to do. And, I think when you really get in the rhythm with that kind of a car, you don't have any time to think about your driving. That's all got to just be subconsciously just flowing and happening, and you're sliding the car and you're on the limit. And then you're kind of debriefing with yourself about what you wish it would do better. And that's when you're consciously now thinking about like, okay, I need a bit more rotation in the middle of the corner, but I really can't be any freer on the brake phase when I get to them. But maybe the release of the brakes, I could use a bit more rotation. That might help me turn in the middle. Oh yeah, I have this switch and I need to change this. That's where you're consciously like your own engineer, I would say, while you're driving that car. And I think the guys that have that figured out certainly are able to tune their cars and keep their cars kind of in the window they want for the whole stint.
So is that as much fun? Like, given a choice, if you're looking at the GTP car with that 80-page instruction manual on all that stuff, or there's another car over there that's, I don't know, sort of old school, just not a whole lot of other stuff, but there's just you and the four tires and that steering wheel and the pedals. Are they equally as fun?
I would say, I'm a race car driver. I love driving anything, but I really do like the ability to tune the car, because you're still driving the thing absolutely on the ragged edge as fast and hard as you can. It's just another level of something to make it harder and more challenging, and a way to separate yourself to the next guy if you can understand those tools and systems a bit better than that guy. You're driving the car just as hard as you would the kind of raw old school car, but you just have more tools at your disposal to be able to really refine it, find lap time, find what suits your style, find a way to be a little quicker. I like the challenge. It's sort of like if you were driving your sim and also then trying to do like a math equation at the same time. Challenging. It challenges yourself to really, really, take in a lot of what's going on.
You said engineer your own car. That's kind of, I'll get from my GT drivers, they'll say, well, it's doing this, and we'll make all we have is TC and ABS, but we can make a suggestion, well, try this with your ABS or try this with your TC to try to help the problem. But you you're shortcutting that. You don't have to tell the engineer and they say, turn, the blue knob to 6 and the red knob to 4 and push this button to help it. If you know that, you can react to that after 2 corners of feeling that, right? I mean, that's, and all the GTP cars, I think I'm correct, are similar in those complexities. So now driving a GTP car is driving it fast on the limit of the tire, but also a driver skill that can separate you is the ability to quickly react to that, right? And do you see some guys that don't, like on a restart or something, like you got your thing set just right and that gives you an advantage?
Yeah, I think definitely tuning the car for what you need and your style and the tire deg in this situation is crucial. I think that's so vital to being fast in a hypercar, a GTP car, whatever it is. And, I think every team and OEM probably has their way of system of helping the driver. I mean, there's definitely times where, the guys that are sitting there that are on the pit box have a lot of ability to be able to kind of look at what we're doing and take what maybe they see us switching switches and trying things, and they might have a bit more understanding of, hey, you should try this and then also this setting. And so I think that kind of working together during the course of, a stint is pretty important as well. You can get a lot of help from those guys who have, more time at their, more hands-on, more sort of feel of what's going on. And then they can look in their computers and look at the graphs and charts and look at what options we have and come up with a package for us to give a try.
So we're unfortunately getting to the end of our hour, but I want to close out by trying something. So we always say the philosophy behind the tone of this show is just people hanging out at a bar, right? So I'm going to take the nerd way out and do exactly what I would do after a bar, after like 2 or 3 drinks, and just go through a handful of things that you've driven, listing some cars, and I want you to give me just the knee-jerk reaction from memory. Could be a word, could be a phrase, could be just a face, like, oh, just a noise. It's the first thing you think of when you think of it. And if it taught you anything, right? And it could be nothing. You could go through the whole list and there could be no lessons learned, which in that case, super cool. But if you did, just, spit it out. Does that sound okay?
I love it. Let's do it.
Okay. So 2005 Porsche 911 GT3 Cup car.
Ooh, super fun. Really, like, you earn your money driving one of those when you do a fast lap. That's a car, like, there's so many of these cars nowadays that you can't, like, just grab by the back of the neck and, like, overdrive to find lap time. And that one is so fun to drive because you can just drag it around. It's definitely, it's fun. Really fun.
Right on. 2006 Riley Pontiac Daytona prototype.
Ooh, man, that really helped launch my career, I would say. I'm very grateful for that car. That was a good one. I enjoyed it a lot. It, it was a special car. And I think one that, for me, that always jumps to my mind is just how much you can bang those into other Daytona prototype cars and how well they stand up. Like, you can abuse those cars and they don't break, stuff doesn't fly off, and they're just as fast. So that was a lot of fun, especially when you're, 16, 17 years old, like just banging into somebody else. That's pretty cool.
Right. I mean, the joke was always that they were really ugly from the outside, but you're in it, you don't see it. It's not ugly from the inside. So the next thing is the 2008 Riley Ford Daytona prototype. You just did a Pontiac. Difference between the Pontiac and the Ford?
I would say the difference there was the Ford didn't matter what gear you were in. Like, you could have been in stuck a thing in 6th and just drove the entire lap in 6th gear. It had so much torque compared to the Pontiac. It was nuts.
2014 Orica Prototype Challenge FLM09 Chevy.
Yeah, probably one of the best cars for the money and the cost. Like, open cockpit, LMP2 chassis, like, such a fun car to drive. For me, won a ton of races in that car. And big fan of that one.
Cool. 2017 Porsche 911 GT3R.
I would say not a whole lot has changed since 2005 on the Porsche side of things. It's still, got to hustle the car a ton. Certainly still has that rear engine kind of feel. We got ABS now. We've got a little more fancy TC, but still pretty raw, real, having to grab it by the back of the neck and grab the lap time out of it.
Okay. So in 2020, you were in and this is a little bit of a split, but in 2020, you were in an Orca Gibson LMP2 car. 2021, you drove a Ligier LMP3 car. In a nutshell, like as tight as you can, what's the difference between those two things, both those cars and a P2 and a P3 car, and how they feel, any of it, right? Knee jerk, right?
Yeah, knee jerk would be like the P2 is just 0.5 better than the P3 car in terms of grip, speed, downforce, all of that. It's just, half a step more of everything. And then I think the Orica and the Ligier, not so different really in end feel. I mean, when you get down to the minutiae, sure, there's differences and there's pros and cons, but from the driving standpoint and whatever, not so different really.
Okay, so now you already talked about, I actually had on this list the Acura, the GTP car, the ARX, but I'm going to skip over that and go to some stuff, because you just talked about it, it was great. So go to some stuff that's kind of random and non-chronological. So NASCAR Cup car, old NASCAR Cup car, live axle.
Man, one of my favorite cars. I just recently, like a couple weeks ago, shook one down for a guy that had bought one. And I said to him, like, man, when I'm like retired and too old and whatever, I'm buying one of these cars to go and drive at the racetrack. Because I couldn't stop smiling. Like I got out of it and I was like, yeah, it's all good. It's ready to go. And, he's like, why are you still laughing? And I'm like, because I had so much fun. Like, I just want to go drive it again. And he's like, sure, go out and drive it again. So, I mean, I just couldn't help myself. I mean, just the amount of power.
What was it?
So much power, such a little tire. Like you go through these corners, the thing sounds all American, just, blasting your ears out. You're hustling. You're like, the steering wheel. It's not like you're moving like this much and driving it. I mean, you're just like arms and elbows. I mean, you feel like you are really doing something as a driver. It is, it's so fun.
Okay, so on that note, you also have time in Xfinity cars, NASCAR trucks, and some ARCA stuff. What's the main difference between that chunk of? They're all different. They're not identical, but they're very similar. What's the main difference between that chunk, that group of NASCAR feeder stuff, and that old Cup car, the way the Cup cars used to be?
I would say, not a tremendous amount. They're so much similar weight-wise. They're so similar in kind of downforce levels. I mean, obviously the trucks had a bit more downforce, but, again, we talked a lot on this show about the tire, but, the tire is such a limiting factor with those cars. They're so small, tired. They're so under-tired. It's so easy to overdrive the limit. You just, all you're focused on is trying to drive, that tire right on the limit. And it's, when I was at Roush, I was driving Xfinity trucks and doing a ton of Cup testing. And it was eerily weird how they were all so similar when you got down to it, I mean, there was definitely differences, again, small differences, but man, the feel from the driver standpoint was incredibly similar.
In 2016, you ran Rallycross in a Ford Fiesta. What was that thing like?
That was very different. All very different, all on the same lap. Like the half of the lap we were on the asphalt, I felt fine, like totally good. I got this, no problems. We jump off into the dirt, and I was like, oh wow, yeah, a lot of the stuff I know about the asphalt, I don't think is applying here at all. So that was a really fun learning challenge and experience, I would say.
How about the time in the air?
The time in the air was scary. For the first few times, definitely scary. I mean, I think we tested down in Florida the first time, and we were going to do this jump. And I remember like driving around without doing the jump for a while, getting used to it, thinking that's pretty cool. And then we were like, okay, we're going to do the jump for the first time. And I was nervous about it because I never really jumped a car before. And then we went and like did the jump once, and you're like, oh, okay, that's not so bad. That seemed fine. Nothing bad happened. And then you go to a track where there's a bigger jump and a longer jump, and now you kind of have all those same things come back over again. And then of course you get into a race and you're racing other guys, and you're just like, all of this like lifting, setting up for the jump, forget that. I'm flat out over this jump trying to go as fast as I can, and it just goes out the window.
What did it feel like when they land? Because they're designed to do it. It's soft, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say most of the time it felt pretty okay, but there was definitely times the jump would get rutted out, or you'd have a little kicker, or you'd decide you need the lift and you'd set down at a weird angle, and those would hurt. And I remember in our cars, it seemed like the window net falling down and the pain in your back was very correlated. Like if the window net fell down on the landing, that was going to hurt your back. Or if your back hurt, there's the window net falling down.
Okay, so that's almost the whole list. The last one I want to close out with, I don't know, the one that I've been wondering about ever since your dad brought it up. The Lara DW12 IndyCar. You tested, you drove for the same team that Ross drove for back in the day, for Dale Coyne.
30 years apart.
Oh, you're not that old,
cool.
Ross. You're only 25. But those things are famously just massive work to drive, right? Manual steering, significant downforce, like they make a lot of grip, and they're just kind of, for what they are, they're meaty analog things, even though they're neither analog nor meaty, right? What was it like?
That was, yeah. I mean, you talk about being physical, for sure physical, you know, no power steering. That was, I wouldn't say like incredibly like hard on your arms to just steer, but when you really are hustling the thing and you're sliding and you're over the limit and you go to catch the car, that's when it really got hard. Sort of that kickback in the wheel. That was probably the hard, part about that car physically. The tire seems to make a lot of grip, I would say. And, power level wasn't too crazy. I thought power level was kind of similar to what the GTP car is. So for me, it was just more about figuring out, how that tire felt and worked, because the tire was so soft, I think, compared to what I'm used to on the sports car side. And with the no power steering, you had such a direct connection to the tire that there was nothing like insulating you from what was going on at the tire. I felt like it was like giant marshmallows out there, and you're just like trying to turn the thing left and right. It was fun.
Cool.
I know we got to extend this a little bit. I have 3 I'd like to add, Sam. This is a great segment. Okay.
I will totally give you 3, totally, because I'm just going to sit here and dork out and listen. So go.
Okay. And these are wildly separate, but things I know he's driven. USAC midget on a quarter-mile track, high banked at Anderson.
Wait, you drove midgets?
Yeah. I have
Rad.
driven all kinds of things. I would say that one was a really fun car to drive because it was so light and it was so different than anything I've driven. I mean, just the way the steering wheel was like in your lap and the way the throttle and the brake worked. And I would say that for me, that was one of the more pressure situations because that was a shootout to try to get my Ford driver development contract. So I was like ready to barrel roll out of the speedway or be as fast as I could. And we did it in a Ford Focus midget, and then we did it in one of their alcohol midgets. And we were fortunate enough, it was with Bob East, and his son, Bobby, was there helping us kind of coach us and whatever. And he said, hey, in this one, I think you can probably be flat all the way around the track. Like, you should have no trouble doing that. So I remember I was one of the last guys to go, and I decided I'm just going to go out there, give myself like one lap driving around to get used to like how it steers, because having the steering wheel in my lap is really weird. And then I'm just going to go flat out and like hold on and steer. And so I did that, and I was the fastest guy. And I came in, and the dad, Bob East, and the Ford people were like, man, you were super fast, but you looked like a dart without feathers down the straightaway because you just are wobbling this thing all around. And I got the gig, so it was fine. But that was intense.
I'm going to interrupt 1 second before the next car. I remember you telling me that all the Ford guys were standing around, Bobby East and all that, and they had the drivers for the shootout, and they said, okay, guys, it's not about lap time. It's how you handle the car. It's how well you adapt to it and stuff like that. We know you've never driven these cars before, so it's just about that. And you looked around, and all 6 of those guys were holding stopwatches, and you went, yeah, right, okay, I'm ignoring that completely.
Exactly. You have to.
All right, the next car, Ford Daytona prototype, set up for world land speed records at Daytona, not for, like with no downforce, tires pumped up to 80 PSI, trying to break the fastest lap ever at Daytona and break 2 standing start world FIA lap records.
Yeah, I would say
so for those who don't know, that was 2013, right?
I don't remember.
I think
Somewhere around there.
Seems
so,
right.
So the notes I have say 2013, and that was a Michael Shank effort, and it was to set the closed course lap record, and it's one of the cooler things you've done, and that's saying a lot. Sorry, go ahead. Just context.
No. I was going to say, I think for me, that knee-jerk reaction is where I have had my expectation and reality the furthest apart. I thought we were going to walk in there, knock this speed record out. I think it was 211 or 12 miles an hour that Bill Elliott had held at Daytona. I thought we'd blow that out and I'd be riding rides in Disney World in like 30 minutes, no problem. And man, it was way, way harder than that. And it took a long time. And it was definitely more hair raising and more on the edge. I think I tell people now, like, I was more test like pilot than I was race car driver. I felt like, one of those guys back in the day, like going out flying this new plane that they hoped would fly and would function. I was just in such a realm of speed and such a realm of like trying to accomplish something that car wasn't designed for, that made it really, really challenging for me and challenging for the engineers. And yeah, that was a lot of work.
So I actually pulled it up on the other screen I've got here. So it'll happen at 222.9 miles an hour. What was it about that car at that speed that made it sketch? For a guy like you in your position to hear that it was sketchy, and you sat there and thought, like what did it feel like, and how did it compare to anything you'd done at the time? Well,
I think I was fortunate enough to be kind of picked by Michael Shank and the guys at Ford, because I'd done obviously sports cars, but I'd also have done NASCAR. So I kind of have a unique blend of both of those together. And I would say it felt way more darty and precise, and just every little input was so reactive in that car. My dad talked about the tires being pumped way up to try to keep the rolling resistance down. Well, there was no different steering box or speed that we went to in that car. It was just whatever we used on road racing. So it became just incredibly darty because, there was no tire sidewall squish to soak up any of the things coming back through the car. So it became just incredibly darty and pointy. And then that car obviously inherently was designed to be a road racing car, making a ton of downforce to make a lot of grip. So by virtue, it had a lot of drag in it. So to go fast around the oval, we tried to peel all that back away, but they couldn't almost get enough out to make it go fast enough. I mean, they did things like cut the mirrors off of it so that had less, aero resistance, and raise the car way up. And they got all these different things kind of going where I remember one run, I went out and they said, all right, we're not sure what this is going to do. We don't have any wind tunnel data of this change, obviously at the speeds we're going, but just go easy and let us know. And I go out getting up to speed down the back straightaway, and I notice like, wow, the steering wheel doesn't feel like it's connected to the tires anymore. Like something must have broke. So I slowed down, and then the steering wheel started working again. And I'm like, I think we just made lift in this car. We're not making downforce anymore, and the front wheels are coming off the ground. So, I mean, you're doing things like that where, definitely became sketchy for sure.
I was standing there in dad mode going, oh man, I hope I don't end up down to one kid after this thing is over. because I'm looking at the data with the engineers, just looking over their shoulder. I had nothing to do with the project other than interested observer, but I'm looking over the shoulder of the engineers, and they have a push rod load sensor that shows the load on the tires. Sitting on the ground in the pits, each front tire had about 300 pounds of weight on them. And I'm looking at the load graph of the front, and as he's going down the back straightaway, I see that thing, with downforce, it should be 500-600 pounds probably on those tires. And I'm seeing it go, 350, 300, 250, 200. The front wheels had less weight on them than they do when they're sitting there statically. And it didn't go to zero, luckily, but I can understand how it felt that way.
One of the things is, I know we need to wrap this up. God, I've got so many more questions.
I got one more.
And I got one.
Okay.
So I will officially shut up after I say this. But one of the things that I remember being shocked by the first time I walked the oval at Daytona and driving around it at significantly lower speed was just how narrow the bank feels when it's at full pitch. How much does that place shrink at 220? Does it feel significantly smaller than it does at, stock car speed at 200, 205, whatever the hell they were doing with restrictors?
Yeah, I think I've got a good understanding of like when they talk about the relativity of speed. I thought, hey, we're going 10, 12 miles an hour faster than what the record was. We do almost 200 miles an hour in the Daytona prototype cars at night in, race trim in the middle of the 24, like 220. It's 20 miles an hour faster. Like, how big of a deal is that going to be? Turns out, yeah, it definitely gets a lot smaller. Turns out the track gets a lot narrower and things definitely happen a lot faster. And especially when they start getting it in your head a little bit, the engineers and the people around, like, hey, Colin, when you go out, you might want to run really close to the wall for the first few runs, just in case something happens. You don't crash far. You just slide up 6 inches and hit the wall. So, I mean, you get, okay, thanks, and off you go. Like, that's a nice parting thought.
One more quick story. The engineers are saying, okay, that was a good run, Colin. It's not the record yet. We're gonna take a little more wing out of it, and we'll kind of sneak up on it here in 2 or 3 more runs. And I remember I'll never forget this. You're on the radio. You're like, guys, let's just go where you think the best is going to be. I want to do this in as few laps as possible. Let's just go there right now. Let's not sneak up on it. Just give me your best shot. Let's do this one time. I don't want to do this 4 times.
One last thing, Colin, and you've talked a lot about tires. And when I think about time with you and tires, I go to a Fiat rental car going from the hotel in Portimao to the racetrack in Portimao on race morning. You, me, and Naj, your co-driver, and we're hustling on that little road that was like not even a car width wide, and a car came the other way. We hit this pothole, and the next thing I know, Colin has leaped out of the car, has got the spare tire out of the back of this thing, because we're gonna be late to get to the track for the race. Colin changed a tire on that Fiat faster than any IndyCar, NASCAR, Formula One team has ever done. So not only are you good at driving tires, you're really good at changing tires. Otherwise, we would never have made it on time for that race.
I didn't want to have us be late. We had to get going, like, got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
All right. So that said, you got to tell me what the gummy bear thing was. The gummy bears in the dash in Europe. What was it? Ross? Colin?
Well, I'll start it off with, we left Red Bull Ring. We're going back to Vienna after the race. Colin is doing his usual, grabbing every snack food possible for the ride back.
My man, salute.
And we get driving along, and there's a lightning storm. And at one point, Colin takes one of the gummy bears, sticks it up in the dash, and the way the light was flashing through the gummy bear, it was really cool. So,
very artistic.
Of course,
very artistic.
If 1 is cool,
after my own heart.
2 is even cooler, and 3 is even cooler. And I think then it became a challenge of how many you could stack up there. And eventually, probably you'd eaten the rest of them. So that's how many we probably got up there. I don't know. That's what I remember, Colin. You tell your side of it now.
I agree. Well, and then it became a challenge. I think you were driving, Ross. And so then it became a challenge of how smooth could Ross be to keep all these gummy bears balanced on the dash, And then the lightning storm passed, the sun came back out, they got gooey, and that either helped or melted them off. Like, it became a thing for the next few days, for sure.
I remember then driving in the underground parking of the hotel, and like 2 of them fell over, and that was a big disaster. But yes, the next morning when we had to take the rental car back to the rental car place, they had pretty much all melted under the dash.
Lesson for the day: racing people are very strange people. And on that note, we are unfortunately out of time. That's our show. Colin, thank you for spending time with us today. Good luck with next season. It is always fun to watch you do what you do, man. And I hope we can have you back soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, guys. Keep up the good work. I appreciate it. And it's going to be definitely a fun season next year.
Oh, cool. Looking forward to seeing it. On that note, we have to read us out. We have to read us out. Strange grammar. That falls to me, unfortunately. So, It's Not the Car is written, produced, and rambled into life by us. Mike Perlman is our executive producer, and I'm the show's creator. If you like this episode and you'd like to support what we do here, check out patreon.com/notthecar and click Become a Member. We also have a merch store and a show site at itsnotthecar.com. The t-shirts and stickers we sell there fund what we do here, and we also have signed copies of my book. And a couple weeks ago, this one guy who bought one asked me to draw a snappy little cartoon in the front of his before I sent it out, and I was happy to do that, and it made me laugh, and I share that only because I ship these things directly from my house because, I don't know, it's the easiest way to fulfill them and also punk rock publishing forever. If you're enjoying this show, please leave a review and share it with anyone you think might enjoy it. Your recommendations make a huge difference, and they really do help us keep It's Not the Car on the air. As always, thank you for listening.
Have fun.
Keep having fun.